WRMANN, bar number 126353.
Good morning, Your Honor. Madeline Loeb, spelled Loeb, bar number 173970.
All right, Ms. Weinmiller.
Good morning, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller for Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is WINEMILLER, and my bar number is 863177.
And Ms. Maxfield.
Yes, Your Honor. Lisa Maxfield here with Ms. Brophy. My bar number is 844337, and my last name is spelled MAXFIELD.
All right, a few things to go over before we call for the jury. One, I don't know that the parties have thought about, but I'm not going to ask you to take a position right now, but I do want to bring it to everybody's attention. ORS 136.280 states that if a juror becomes unavailable during deliberations, the court can replace the juror with an alternate if both parties agreed to the substitution prior to the beginning of trial. Otherwise, the alternates are discharged at the end of closing argument. Now, that was not discussed prior to trial starting, and the only way that I could see around the statute potentially would be a stipulation by the parties. I'm not asking you to stipulate to anything right now, but in order to preserve the possibility, if a deliberating juror becomes unavailable, of replacing them with an alternate, I'm considering telling the alternates that they are not yet discharged and to continue to refrain from discussing the case or looking up any information on the case until a verdict is reached. But I again, not asking you as to whether or not the sides would stipulate later to something that would allow for the replacement of a juror, but does either side have an issue with me making that statement to the alternate jurors after closing arguments? And I guess I'll ask the state first.
No, Your Honor, makes sense.
Defense?
No, that's a good idea.
Okay. All right, so then I want to get into the defense requested instruction on informant testimony. And I know that I sent an email to both sides over the weekend, but I do want to put on the record my thought process for the modifications that I made. The defense has requested an instruction on informant testimony, which I think is appropriate to have in some form. My issue with the defense requested instruction is there was no definition of what an informant is, and I think that there's a disagreement between the sides as to whether or not there has been informant testimony in this case. When I look at the basic dictionary definition of an informant, it is someone who informs or gives information, which is such a broad definition that would apply to every witness in the case. In a criminal context, I believe that we think of an informant as someone who provides information or testifies at trial in order to receive a benefit. But if the sides feel differently, they can certainly let me know. And thus, I have proposed an instruction and given it to the sides, which I think allows for the possibility that the jury concludes there was informant testimony, but doesn't instruct them that an informant has testified. So I guess I'll just allow either side to put anything they want on the record with regard to this. We'll start with the state.
Your Honor, your proposed instruction seems satisfactory to our side.
All right, and then for defense.
We're also satisfied with it, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not going to give the defense requested instruction on inferences. I believe that the uniform instruction, along with other instructions about not guessing or speculating, are sufficient. The language provided by defense is accurate, but it is verbiage taken from cases where a court was explaining why, under a given fact scenario, the facts couldn't support a guilty verdict. I think as written, they would just be more confusing than helpful to the jury. I did get this morning a motion in limine. I know it was sent yesterday, but I didn't see it till this morning. A motion in limine to prevent argument by the state regarding being precluded from finding or testing gun parts. I guess I'll first ask the state if they had a chance to see the motion.
We did, Your Honor.
And what's the state's response to that?
Well, we disagree. I think that the majority of the cases cited by defense are cases where the defendant did not testify. Certainly, it's the state's assertion in this case that the missing slide and barrel is the murder weapon or part of the murder weapon. And I think the state can argue that. In particular, in this case, not only did Ms. Brophy take the stand, but she took the stand and addressed both the missing slide and barrel and her explanation of where it could be or where it could have gone, or why she does or doesn't seem to remember that. She also addressed and brought, I think, even further into argument the issue of the slide and barrel when she talked about the ghost gun and her labeling of the ghost gun kit for the police, and then her inability to recall or say why she didn't do the same for the slide and barrel. I think all of those, there's more that came into the record even than before we started this case with opening statements. I don't think, certainly, case law suggests, and many of these cases cited are cases where the prosecutor in those cases commented on, in one case, an expert witness that was specifically not allowed to testify due to the rules of evidence and commented on what that witness would have said. In another case, the state commented on a video that was excluded, and because of the rules of evidence and the way that that worked and that the door hadn't been opened on cross-examination of the victim complainant in that case, and commented on what that would have said to bolster the credibility of a witness. None of the cases that defense supported, I think, supports their assertion. And I think the facts as they've come out in this case give wide range for the state to comment on the fact that we don't have that. We looked for it. We could not find it. It doesn't exist. And we heard testimony that it could be tested. Obviously, it's not like the state's going to say what the results of such testing would be. We can't say that, of course. But I think the state has every ability, based on the facts of this case, to discuss the fact that it is not here, it was not found anywhere, and to comment on that.
All right, and defense, I have, of course, read your motion, and it'll be included in the record. Is there anything orally that you wanted to add to it?
Yes, Your Honor. Whether or not Ms. Brophy takes the stand, whether or not she presents a scintilla of evidence, does not change the state's burden of proof. Any effort to suggest that she had an obligation, a duty, or a need to produce evidence that the state wants is burden shifting, and it's unconstitutional. Our objection is to words like prevents, or that the suggestion that the state makes is that there was some sort of obstruction, and certainly nothing Ms. Brophy said would support that. But any attempt to shift the burden of evidence production to the defense violates our client's constitutional rights, and we would ask the court to preclude it.
All right. I assume the state is not going to argue that Ms. Brophy had an obligation or a necessity to turn over the slide. Am I correct in that assumption?
Can I answer that, Your Honor?
Whoever's making the closing argument can answer it.
No, we wouldn't assert that she had an obligation to turn it over, but I think that Ms. Brophy herself invited some comments and some argument on the idea that she thought certain things were important for the police, including gun parts and gun kits. I think that opens the door to an argument, but why wasn't the slide and barrel important? Why didn't you think the police would want that? Not to insinuate that she had an obligation to do it, but based on her own testimony that she thought these were things that were important, but she just didn't seem to think the slide and barrel were important. I think that's where I plan to argue concerning that, and the fact that, obviously the fact that she can't recall just what happened to it, but certainly not insinuate that she had some sort of obligation.
All right, I'll allow the argument. Before we call the jury in, I just want to make sure that everyone understands who the current presumptive 12 are. If the sides want. If the sides feel they're comfortable, they know who the 12 are, okay. Then I'll just give you, I'll just read them in order. This is not necessarily where they're seated, but the jurors who are the presumptive 12 are numbers 5, 15, 16, 241, 23, 26, 28, 38, 40, 44, 46, 48. That leaves 4 potential alternates if they were needed at some point during deliberations. Those 4 would be 54, 58, 59, and 61. And so what we'll do is print both sides a copy of the instructions so that they can look along as we go. And Ms. Lou, can you also email those to me so I can have them if I see it? Yeah.
And defense and counsel also has a copy of it.
Okay, perfect. Then anything else before we call for the jury?
Not from the state.
All right, then let's bring the jury.
And we'll go off record and we will.
All right, everyone can be seated. All right, for the jury, I'm going to now read you the instructions before we have the closing arguments. You will get a set of these when you go back to deliberate, so it's not necessary to write down what I'm saying, but I would ask you to pay careful attention since it will help you make sense of the closing arguments. Now, it's your sole responsibility to make all the decisions about the facts in the case. You must evaluate the evidence to determine how reliable or how believable the evidence is. When you make your decision about the facts, you must then apply the legal rules to those facts and reach your verdict. Remember, however, that your power to reach a verdict is not arbitrary. When I tell you what the law is on a particular subject or tell you how to evaluate certain evidence, you must follow these instructions. Don't allow anything I have said or done during the course of this trial to suggest that I have formed any opinion about the case. Keep in mind that a judge is required by law to give certain instructions in every criminal case and to read them to you. When I have sustained objections to evidence or ordered that evidence be stricken or excluded from your consideration, you must follow these rulings. Do not consider such matters during your deliberations. Base your verdict on the evidence and these instructions. The lawyer's statements and arguments are not evidence. If your recollection of the evidence is different from the lawyer's recollection, you must rely on your own memory. Now, in deciding the case, you're to consider all the evidence you find worthy of belief. It is your duty to weigh the evidence calmly and dispassionately and to decide this case on its merits. Do not decide this case on guesswork, conjecture, or speculation. You should make every effort to be aware of your biases, including unconscious biases, and what effect those may have on your decision-making. In your deliberations, you must not be biased in favor or against any party, witness, or lawyer because of the person's disability, gender identity, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, national origin, or socioeconomic status. We all have feelings, assumptions, perceptions, fears, and stereotypes about others. Some biases we are aware of, and others we may not be fully aware of. These hidden thoughts can affect what we see and hear, how we remember what we see and hear, how we interact with others, and how we make important decisions. Do not allow any personal feelings, sympathy, prejudice, or bias, whether conscious or unconscious, to influence your decision-making. Do not consider what sentence the court might impose if you find the defendant guilty. Generally, the testimony of any witness whom you believe is sufficient to prove any fact in dispute. You're not simply to count the witnesses, but you are to weigh the evidence. Keep in mind that each party is entitled to the considered decision of each juror. Therefore, you should not give undue weight to another juror's notes or memory if they conflict with your recollection of the evidence. Now, the court will provide written instructions for your use. When you use the instructions, do not place undue emphasis on any particular instruction, but rather view the instructions as a whole. Evaluating witness testimony. The term witness includes every person who has testified under oath in this case. Every witness has taken an oath to tell the truth. In evaluating each witness's testimony, however, you may consider such things as the manner in which the witness testifies, the nature or quality of the witness's testimony, evidence that contradicts the testimony of the witness, evidence concerning the bias, motives, or interests of the witness, evidence concerning the character of the witness for truthfulness, evidence that the witness has been convicted of a previous crime. Informant. An informant is a witness who testifies in exchange for a benefit in their own criminal case. A benefit can include an actual, tangible benefit, as well as a benefit the witness subjectively expects or hopes to receive, whether or not these perceived benefits are grounded in reality. If you determine that a witness was an informant, you should consider their testimony with caution. Vouching. It's for you and you alone to decide whether to believe a witness's testimony. Witnesses are not permitted to give opinions on whether another witness is or was being truthful in any given statement. Despite the court's efforts to prevent such testimony, A witness's testimony occasionally can be interpreted as an opinion on another witness's truthfulness in regards to a particular statement. If that occurs, you should not give any weight to the witness's opinion about the credibility of that statement. You are the sole arbiters of facts in this case, and thus must disregard any other witness's opinion about the credibility of any account of the underlying events. Inferences. In deciding this case, you may draw inferences and reach conclusions from the evidence if your inferences and conclusions are reasonable and are based on your common sense and experience. Innocence of defendant, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant is innocent until and unless the state proves the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Some of you may have served as jurors in civil cases where you were told that it's only necessary to prove that a fact is more likely true than not true. In criminal cases, the state's proof must be more convincing than that. It must be beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is an honest uncertainty as to the defendant's guilt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. There are very few things in the world that we know with absolute certainty, and in criminal cases the law does not require proof that overcomes every possible doubt. If, based on your careful consideration of all of the evidence, you are firmly convinced that the defendant is guilty of the crime charged, you must return a verdict of guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there is a reasonable possibility that the defendant is not guilty, you must give the defendant the benefit of the doubt and return a verdict of not guilty. Subcategory classification factors. If you find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree, then you must consider the additional allegation that during the commission of the crime, the defendant used or threatened the use of a firearm, and that the defendant and the victim were family or household members at the time of the offense. The state bears the burden to prove that allegation to be true beyond a reasonable doubt. In order for the jury to return a finding of yes on that allegation, all jurors must agree that the state has proved that during the commission of the crime, the defendant used or threatened the use of a firearm, and the defendant and the victim were family or household members at the time of the offense. Defendant statements. When a witness testifies about statements made by the defendant, Nancy Crampton Brophy, you should consider such testimony with caution. In reviewing such testimony, you should consider, among other things, the following. 1. Did the defendant make the statement? And if so, did she clearly express what she intended to say? 2. Did the witness correctly hear and understand what the defendant said? 3. Did the witness correctly remember and relate what the defendant said? 4. Did the witness intentionally or mistakenly alter some of the defendant's words, thereby changing the meaning of what was actually said? If, after weighing such factors, you conclude that the defendant, Mrs. Crampton Brophy, said what she intended to say, and that the witness to the statement correctly understood, remembered, and related to you what the defendant, Ms. Crampton Brophy, said, then you're authorized to consider such statements for what you deem them to be worth. Direct and circumstantial evidence. There are two types of evidence. One is direct evidence, such as the testimony of an eyewitness. The other is circumstantial evidence, the proof of a chain of circumstances pointing to the existence or non-existence of a certain fact. You may base your verdict on direct evidence, or on circumstantial evidence, or on both. Non-expert opinion evidence. Although a witness may be allowed to state his or her opinion, you're not required to accept that opinion. To determine what value, if any, you'll give to a witness's opinion, you should consider such things as the witness's opportunity and ability to form the opinion, the witness's believability, and how the witness reached the opinion. Expert opinion evidence. An expert witness is a person with special skills or education in a particular field. Even though expert witnesses may testify about their opinions, you're not required to accept those opinions. To determine the value, if any, you'll give to an expert's opinion, you should consider such things as the expert's qualifications, the expert's opportunity and ability to form the opinion, the expert's believability, and how the expert reached the opinion or conclusion. intentionally and with intent. A person acts intentionally or with intent when that person acts with a conscious objective to cause a particular result. When used in the phrase intentionally cause the death of Daniel Brophy, another human being, intentionally or with intent means that a person acts with a conscious objective to cause the death of Daniel Brophy. Stipulation of fact. The state and defense have agreed or stipulated that on June 2nd, 2018, the Oregon Culinary Institute alarm was disabled by Daniel Brophy at 7:22 a.m. and 30 seconds. This means they've both agreed that that is a fact. You may therefore treat this fact as having been proved. Domestic violence. Domestic violence means abuse between family or household members. Abuse means attempting to cause or intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing physical injury, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly placing another in fear of imminent serious physical injury, or committing sexual abuse in any degree. Family or household members mean any of the following: spouses, former spouses, adult persons related by blood or marriage, persons cohabiting with each other, persons who have cohabited with each other or who have been involved in a sexually intimate relationship, or unmarried parents of a minor child. Crime involving domestic violence. At the time of the act, Daniel C. Brophy was the spouse of the defendant and was cohabitating with the defendant. Murder in the second degree. Oregon law provides that a person commits the crime of murder in the second degree if that person intentionally causes the death of another human being. In this case, to establish the crime of murder in the second degree, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt the following acts. 1. The act occurred on or about June 2nd, 2018, and 2. Nancy Lee Crampton Brophy intentionally caused the death of Daniel C. Brophy, another human being. And with that, we will go to the closing arguments of the parties, starting with the state.
Give me just one. Good morning. Before I get started, I want to first thank you for all the time and the dedication that it took to sit through such a long trial. No matter how you view the evidence in this case, there are some things that are obvious. When Dan was killed on June 2nd, 2018, shortly after arriving at work, that was done by somebody who wanted and needed Dan dead. And I'm sorry, Judge, are we allowed to remove our masks? We were for
Yes,
opening.
I'm sorry. For arguments, both sides can remove their masks.
Thank you. Dan was executed on June 2nd. This wasn't an accident, clearly. There was no struggle. There was no robbery. There was no interrupted burglary. Whoever went in to the Culinary Institute in that short 6-minute window went in there to kill Dan. There's no other way to view that. The person who went in there also was not just lucky. A random attack that just happened to be at the exact same time that Nancy Brophy was at the Culinary Institute. The exact same time and using the exact same weapon, same make and model and caliber that Nancy Brophy happened to own. It's too much of a coincidence. There's too many coincidences. Nancy Brophy, however, had all the knowledge that she needed to carry this out. She knew everything about Dan's routine. She knew everything about that school, down to the fact that they wouldn't have cameras. She had the plan in place. She had the opportunity to carry out this murder. And she also had, she's the only person who had the motive. Everybody loved Dan. Nobody would want to hurt Dan. Even Nancy herself told that to detectives. Nobody would want to hurt Dan. So nobody else had motive, but Nancy did. I want to first talk to you a little bit about the jury instructions. You just heard what it is to convict somebody of murder. You got the instruction, and it's very simple. If you look up at the screen on the upper left-hand side, there's two things that have to be proven. Most everything is not in dispute. That the act occurred on June 2nd, I don't think you're going to get any argument against that. And that Dan Brophy was intentionally murdered. That's not in dispute. What is in dispute is the name that's on the screen. Nancy Brophy. That's the only thing about this crime that the parties disagree. Now there's a couple other things that are not in dispute, and that is the questions that come after. As the judge said, if you find Nancy Brophy guilty of murder in the second degree, there's two other questions you have to answer, yes or no. And they're very simple. You're not going to have to struggle with these at all, and nobody's going to argue against it. The first one is, were they married? Were they spouses? Of course they were. Nobody's disputing that. The second is, was this crime, was there use or threatened use of a firearm? Of course there was. We know Dan Brophy was shot and killed. So again, two questions, very simple. Another instruction that you just received is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's an instruction that the judge read to you now a couple of times. Again, you'll have a copy of these. I would urge you to read it again. Beyond a reasonable doubt has to be based in common sense and reason. The judge just instructed you, it's not beyond all doubt. And the point here being, if you find yourself back in the jury room saying, well, what if? What if this? What if we would have heard this? What if we would have heard that? What if we would have seen that? You're now speculating. You're now going beyond what it is that the reasonable doubt instruction is telling you to do. And pay attention here. This is exactly what the defense is going to stand up here and ask you to do. They want you to ask the what if questions. They don't want you to pay attention to the evidence that you heard here in the courtroom. They want you to play the what if game and think that that's equal to reasonable doubt, and it's not. Now what you do need to base your verdict on is the evidence. So what is the evidence? Well, it's not a couple of things. One, it's not speculation. Anytime you find yourself speculating, that's not evidence. But the judge just instructed you that direct and circumstantial evidence is evidence. And the reason that's pointed out is because direct evidence is clear, right? Somebody says, I saw this, I saw it happen. Where circumstantial evidence is that chain of evidence that leads you to a fact. It's, well, Nancy Brophy was downtown, she's in front of the Culinary Institute. That's circumstantial evidence that would suggest that Nancy Brophy committed this crime. Now this case is full of circumstantial evidence. The state has not shied away from that. It's all circumstantial evidence. But what this instruction is telling you is that's evidence. You can use that just as you would direct evidence, as if somebody had actually seen Nancy Brophy pull the trigger. Now what you're also allowed to do, you were just instructed on, is consider inferences. Based on some of the information that you have, you can make some inferences. And just by way of an example, real briefly, is that the roll-up door was open that morning. Nobody saw Nancy walk through that roll-up door, but it seems reasonable to infer that if she entered the building that morning, that she walked through the roll-up door. It's a reasonable inference that you can make. What also is evidence is the witnesses. And as the judge just instructed you, you don't just count up how many witnesses were brought in here to tell you various things. You have to take each witness individually. What did they say? How did they testify? Number 4 there, considering their bias, motives, and the interest of the witness. By way of an example here, and what we're talking about is look at Nancy Brophy's own testimony. First, what's her motive for testifying? Well, she's got to explain to you. She felt the need to get up there on the stand and explain to you all of these issues, right? The state put on a case, looks really bad for her, so she needed to explain it. Now, at the same time you're considering that, what her motivation is to testify, think about how she testified. What did she do? She got up there as the smartest person in the room. She got up there very comfortably, leaned back in that chair, answered the questions of her attorney, very comfortable, as if she's waiting for that moment. And it only got uncomfortable with her when I asked her questions. She didn't like those questions. She kept looking to her attorney. She even asked her attorney a question during the middle of the cross-examination. She looked over at her attorney and said, "Did you say that?" She was thrown off many times and very uncomfortable. Then look what happened on redirect. Right back to Nancy's old self, very comfortable, smartest person in the room, including all of you. She sat up there with the intent of manipulating all of you into believing the lies. And make no mistake about it, when I say the smartest person in the room, I mean everyone. She's manipulating every single person in this room, just like she has all of her friends, just like she has all of her family. One of the things I want to point out before we move on to what the actual evidence is in this section here, what also is not evidence. I want to urge you to pay attention to this point because what's not evidence is the lawyer's statements and their questions. Now, defense asked a lot of questions, a lot of leading questions of the state's witnesses. What they asked is not evidence, only the answers. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because also the lawyer's statements in their opening statements, which I know has been quite a while ago, but if you recall, the defense lawyer stood up and said, Nancy Googled gun shops in Portland on February 1st of 2018 because she just read a news article about the Las Vegas shooter. That's why she was Googling gun shops on February 1st, 2018. I would urge you to go back in your memory and think about which witness sat up here and told you that. I don't mean to spoil it, but I can tell you the answer, and that was no one. No one said that, not even Nancy herself. But the lawyers said it. And there's numerous points in their opening statements that they made assertions that you simply just didn't hear in this trial, or you heard a different version of it. So you have to consider what the witnesses actually said. Now, the state actually brought you real evidence. What is that evidence? You go back to June 2nd, and Nancy Brophy, despite defense assertions and expert assertions, had a very specific story for what she was doing and what Dan was doing on the morning of June 2nd when she spoke with the detectives.
So this morning, did you wake up at the same time or after him, or how'd that go?
I didn't sleep well, and I don't know why I didn't sleep well, but I think that I'm to that age. So I woke up when he came up for a shower. So that would have been 6:50, 6:45.
And you said because he was getting a shower, that's when you woke up? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he used to shower downstairs, but last week you'll see stitches on his hand. See it? I don't know which hand. Because last week in the shower, our shower door shutters. He's not having a good week. Oh, that sounded good.
When did you see him after that? Did you have breakfast with him? What happened after that?
I didn't get out of bed.
Oh, you just kind of woke up and you were alert in bed.
Yeah,
okay.
And we have our bedroom is an attic. Was an attic, and so the bathroom's right here, and so he got dressed and left.
Did he say Did you guys talk before he left or anything like that?
About the water leak.
Oh,
I discovered it yesterday when I was cleaning out from under the sink, and so he asked me what all the wet cloths were in the sink, and that was when I remembered it. And so he went down to get something to put under the sink, so if it was still leaking, it wasn't, it wouldn't ruin it.
okay. And so then you think he left like around 7 to 10, maybe something like that?
7:05, 7:10,
7:05,
yeah.
7:10. Okay. And then
Nancy Brophy wasn't recalling what she normally does that morning. She told the detectives exactly what she was doing that morning. Now, we know that's not true because she's driving around downtown. So it's a completely made-up story that she intentionally told the police. She knew she had to have a story, so you go with a simple one. Well, I was at home. Of course, we look at her phone and it's at home. So I was at home. I was in bed, never got out of bed. And then they talked about a leak that she discovered yesterday. That's not somebody recalling facts about what they normally do. She's trying to give the police a very specific story. It's her alibi. It's where is she at the time of the murder. It's not, I don't remember. You'll have this full recording. I would urge you to go back and listen to the whole thing all over again. I know we played it for you earlier. Go back and listen to the whole thing. Listen to the tone of the whole thing. She's telling the detectives what she thinks they need to hear. Now, this is referred to as a death notification. Nancy Brophy doesn't feel like it's a death notification because she already knows, first of all. She already knows he's dead. What did she sit there on the stand and tell you? She said it felt like an interrogation. They just kept coming at her and piling on and piling on. Yeah, she probably felt that way. She probably felt like it was an interrogation because she had to make sure that she told the detectives a valid story, a valid alibi. So it was probably very stressful to be sitting in that van and talking to those detectives. I'm sure it was. But it was anything but. The detectives did not suspect that she was a murderer at that point. They testified and told you that. They had no reason to believe that she was a murderer. They had not seen the Bellagio's video yet. They had no information to suspect that she was a murderer. So why would Nancy Brophy feel that way when she's in the van? Now, again, in defense opening statements, they said, well, she did what she did on every other morning. She got up, she drove to Starbucks, and then she got immersed in her story writing. Nancy Brophy didn't tell you that on the stand. So why are they telling you that in opening statement? That's not what she did. It's hard to keep the lies straight when you spin a web of lies so great and you have to tell the same story. It's very difficult. And she's not able to do it. So she gets up on the stand, and what does she say? The ultimate alibi. I don't remember. I don't remember what I did that morning. I got up, I talked to Dan. He was carrying some towels downstairs. I partially got dressed, and that's it. Don't remember. Now, it's going to be a common theme when you think about her testimony. At every critical point of Nancy Brophy's testimony, at every critical point in turn in this case, she just doesn't remember. How convenient. So, if you want to try to believe, well, how is it possible that Nancy Brophy doesn't remember? We heard a lot of conflicting expert testimony about how that works. So you have to kind of look at, well, which one, not even considering the state's expert, Dr. Best, just look at the defense experts that talked about memory and trauma. Dr. Warford, with her complete mess of a testimony, sat up here and said she would expect somebody with this type of trauma to have memory issues because you can't commit that memory to long-term memory. And she didn't really know what she was talking about, as you probably picked up on, because she's a domestic violence expert. She's not a memory expert. She doesn't really know how this stuff works. She wrote a report that had to be interpreted by others. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And she got very defensive. Instead of answering questions, when you're considering how people testified, instead of answering questions when being critical about how she came up with her opinion, she got upset. Not just answer the question, she got upset. She got defensive. And when we tried to pin her down to at what point was the trauma? Well, probably around the time of the text message that went unanswered. But one, how is that trauma? It's not. And two, how are you getting your timeline? And then how does that mean you just forgot the past 3 hours? So, okay, maybe you don't consider Dr. Warford's testimony because you just don't know what it means, and she clearly doesn't have the expertise in this field. So what did Dr. Raceberg say? Well, first, consider who Dr. Raceberg is. Somebody who's never seen a patient in his life, has no idea how this stuff actually applies, and he just talks about studies that have been done. Okay, so studies done on memory, great. Well, how does that apply to Ms. Brophy? We have no idea. He did no analysis of Ms. Brophy, reviewed no evidence, didn't look at Dr. Warford's report. I don't think talked to Dr. Warford. Maybe he said that, I don't know. But he has no idea how that would apply to Nancy Brophy. What kind of person she is and how she would respond to trauma and how that would affect her memory. No idea. The only person you heard from that could actually kind of put the pieces together was Dr. Best. Somebody who actually sees clients, actually sees people who suffer this very type of trauma. She's even seen patients that seen their loved ones be murdered. She also claims not to be a memory expert, but she knows how trauma affects memory. That's her field. And that's why she got up here and told you the premise is all wrong. The premise of, well, Nancy Brophy just, she had this terrible trauma, so therefore she just forgot everything. But the premise is wrong. That's what Dr. Best was trying to tell you. Because Nancy Brophy, even according to Dr. Warford, is this cognitive individual. Somebody who's a problem solver. Somebody who does well in the face of crisis. That's somebody who would not respond this way. That is not somebody who would respond by dissociating and not recalling a single thing, because she told you it's a proxy for her emotion. It's an emotional response. And so somebody like Nancy Brophy doesn't do that. She doesn't dissociate and just forget things. Who are people that dissociate? Who are the people that forget things? Those are people that are basically not functional. Those are not people that can work. Those are not people that can run a catering company. Those aren't even people that can drive a car. Those are the people that dissociate to the degree the defense is asking you to consider. And it's simply not who Nancy Brophy is. Now, what you heard a little bit of testimony on is, well, a lot of people in Nancy Brophy's situation claim amnesia, claim to have forgotten. A lot of people do that, specifically in homicide cases. And people who are intelligent, have a higher level of intelligence, have a better chance of going undetected in doing so. Their own expert testified to that. But they didn't bother doing any testing to see if Nancy Brophy was malingering, feigning that she didn't actually remember. They just didn't do any of the testing. So when we look at what's going on June 2nd, see up on our timeline here, what is she doing that morning? She's driving around downtown. We know that. Despite what she told the police, despite not remembering, she's driving around downtown. And apparently now on the stand, she's willing to say, yeah, that's me. Now remember, she didn't quite commit to that when she was talking to her defense attorneys. When they were questioning her about her being downtown, she said, well, I know that looked like me, and I know that looked like my van, but she never committed to it being her. I had to ask her a few times, are you willing to say that that is you? She finally would admit that that's her driving around downtown. So what is she doing? Well, we know she's downtown at 6:39. It's the first time she's seen on that first video. And we know that when she first does her first pass, this is her path. She comes into town, she turns onto 20th, and she drives up. She's out of frame, and you'll see this video here in a moment. She's up there for a few minutes. She comes back to 20th, and I'll talk about what we believe she's doing at the time. And then she comes towards that circle, traffic circle, and then she heads north out of frame on 18th. And then she's gone for quite a while. And she's seen again what is referred to as the second pass, first on that KGW video. And remember, on that KGW video, you see her drive into frame, and then that second video that you see at KGW is a motion-activated camera. So she just kind of pops into frame. And then she waits there. We'll talk about what she's doing there in just a minute. And then she drives up, goes around, and is on 17th Avenue when she leaves the frame. And what we'll talk about, and what we talked about with Detective Merrill, is when she enters into this area, we know that she would have had to stay in this area when she's off camera, because she can't head east on Jefferson. It's a one-way street the other way. She doesn't go west on Jefferson because she would have been seen on the cameras. And had she gone out Madison, now it's possible she went all the way up here, but we saw after at 7:28 that she's turning off of 17th onto Jefferson. So we know that she's in that area. And we're going to look at the video, State's Exhibit 19 that you'll have back there. And what this does, it shows you the map of where the cameras are, and then it cuts to each set of video. And so what you'll see here in a moment is you'll see Miss Brophy's van driving into town at 6:39. Here she comes. So she turns up here. There's a couple things about that road. As you can see, you'll see on this map, and there's another map as well, but there's nowhere to go. There's no outlet. It's not really a dead end because you can go to these buildings, but there's nowhere to go. The only way back out is to come back out to Jefferson. And so a couple of things. What is she doing? Well, we know she's not going up there to write, because one, she doesn't remember that. And even if she does, she's not up there long enough. She's up there just a couple of minutes. Is it possible that she's looking for a vantage point of the Culinary Institute? Maybe. It's kind of far away at that point. Culinary Institute being here, this being the road that she's on. But nonetheless, what could she be doing? Well, she could be waiting for Dan to drive into town, assuming he takes Jefferson. If she's here on this road and Dan drives in this way, it's possible that's where she thinks that she could get a good look at Dan coming into town. Now, one thing to keep in mind, why is she there so early? Why 6:40? Well, remember, she knows that this is the live fire. You heard a lot of testimony about live fire and the preparation that goes into it. She expected Dan to be early that day. She expected Dan to be pretty early that day. Now, she knows that he normally leaves at 7:05 or 7:10. That's what she said. But she's expecting him to come down even earlier on this morning. So once she gets the green light and she takes off, she now turns down Jefferson. Just to follow along with the camera angles, just so you know what we're talking about, she's coming down Jefferson. And then when she gets to this traffic circle, there's another light. There's quite a few lights around here. And then she'll ultimately drive around the traffic circle, past Columbia, and then head out 18th. And you'll see that on the video here momentarily. Now, one of the things you heard Nancy say is she's familiar with this area. There's no reason to think that she's lost. She said she's familiar with the Goose Hollow area. She's been down there a lot. She's been to the Culinary Institute hundreds of times. So obviously she's familiar with the area. So you have to ask yourself, what is she doing? If she knows the area, one, I don't know that there's a park right here where she's going to right. I don't see one on the map. And she doesn't remember, so she can't really tell you that's what she was doing. So what is she doing? I would present to you that she's trying to find a place that she can get a good, clear vantage point on when Dan arrives, and for her not to necessarily be seen. So after some time passes when she's out of the frame, she then comes up, like I said, the KGW video, and this is motion activated, so you'll see that, oh, she just pops, she just appears there at 7:03. Now she's there for several minutes. So why is that? And if our theory is that she's looking for a vantage point, this is where KGW is. This is that second camera facing out to Jefferson. She's sitting on Jefferson. You heard Detective Merrill say there's a slight slope to this road, Jefferson, as it heads down to the Culinary Institute. Could she perhaps be sitting there thinking she would see when Dan arrived at the Culinary Institute? And maybe she was. But I also presume that at this point, Nancy's getting kind of nervous. It's now 7:07. She doesn't see Dan. She's thinking he's going to be early. Maybe that's not a good enough vantage point, because what if he parks on 17th like he always does? So Nancy has to continue driving. This is when she makes her first pass of the Culinary Institute. And as you saw in that Affinity video, and again, you'll be able to watch this as many times as you want, she appears to kind of slow down as she gets up to 17th. But she can't just turn onto 17th, because Dan would obviously see her there. So she continues around, passes the Culinary Institute, goes around the roundabout one more time, and then you'll see here in a moment, she heads down Columbia. This is a very hard angle, but this is just her going through that roundabout. There she goes, completing the roundabout. And then this is a PG camera that's very hard to see. It's far back. That camera's all the way back here. And it's looking this way, up Columbia. But what you'll see is there she is driving down Columbia, and she takes a left onto 17th. And that's the last time she's seen until 7:28. And we can, actually, I'm sorry, we'll wait till the, yeah. So now that we know she's in this area, like I said, she's probably getting nervous. Dan's not there yet. It's now 7:09. She knows she doesn't have a lot of time. Dan is then seen coming down Jefferson at 7:19. He doesn't go straight to the Culinary Institute, meaning he doesn't come down this way and go that route. He does what he normally does, where he turns up here, comes down Madison, and parks right there. Like the detectives told you, they look back at Google Maps over the years, and there's Dan's truck. Creature of habit, as you've heard. Now, why is that important to where Nancy's at? Well, there's a big parking lot right here, and a building. I'm sorry if the podium's in the way. A big parking lot. She's turned onto 17th. Parking lot, building. Remember Potluck in the Park? A building she's very familiar with. In fact, that's where she parks when she comes down later in the morning. So either she stays back here and she has a nice clear vantage point to the southeast corner of the Culinary Institute where Dan parks. She would see the moment that he arrives. Now, Dan might not necessarily see her, but she could sit there, she could watch, and once he arrives, she could watch him for a moment. Now, this is where that alarm becomes important. 7:22 and 30 seconds. We know we see her on camera again at 7:28, so we know she has less than 6 minutes. Now, does she wait the whole 6 minutes? No. But she has to wait until Dan is done going in and out of the school. because remember, he's bringing stuff to the school that day. So she can watch Dan come in and out, open that roll-up door, take items inside, and then once she realizes that he's not coming back out again, the coast is clear for her. She then drives across Jefferson to 17th, and now she has the opportunity. Now at this point, we're probably down to just a few minute window, because if she's watched Dan do a couple of things, we only have a few more minutes. So she can walk into the school at that point, walk through the roll-up door, navigate the building, find Dan in the back room, and shoot him. Now, I'm sorry, are we moving on to the next video? I didn't want to skip too far ahead there. So you know it's a small window of time, and we'll talk in a little bit about what that means if this is somebody other than Nancy Brophy. But she has this small window of time. Now, when we see Dan arrive, I'm sorry, I don't want to lose my place. Which slide are we going to? Right, okay. So at 7:28, you see Nancy Brophy, as we said, and you've seen the video already, of Nancy turning off a 17th onto Jefferson. And that's a critical time, and it's a critical place where she's at. You know, she's in front of the Culinary Institute. And so once she admitted that she was the one that was driving, I asked her, well, isn't it possible if you don't remember that you went into the building like you did a few weeks prior? Nope, not possible. Well, are you sure? I mean, you don't remember. So isn't it possible? I just wanted to see if she would acknowledge that she could go into the building. Nope, not possible. Well, how do you know you didn't go inside and kill him and you don't remember? Not possible, I know it in my heart. She can't remember anything, but she knows in her heart that she couldn't have done it. And what she does remember is later on that morning, all the phone calls. So after she leaves town, I guess I don't want to jump too far ahead, sorry. Again, this is that exhibit that was created for you by Kelsey Guay, just to show you with the animation. One, this first vehicle, not involved, as was said. You can see the headlights. And what it appeared is if those headlights had a continuous track past 17th up Jefferson. And then what was noticed is that you can see the side of Nancy Brophy's van as it pulled off of 17th onto Jefferson. So what happens when she gets back home that morning? Now, she doesn't remember being frantic and talking to her neighbors. She doesn't remember that, even though they had never seen her like that before. She lost the dogs, but nobody ever saw the dogs. So what is she doing? She's continuing to set up that alibi. She needs people to see her home. Because if the police ever come knocking, they're going to want to know from the neighbors, did you see her? Yeah, I saw her that morning. Saw her around 8 o'clock. She was very frantic, but she was looking for her dogs as she normally does. But nobody sees these dogs. So she doesn't remember that, but she does remember that first phone call from Maxine Bourgeardin. She not only remembers the phone call from Maxine Bourgeardin, she remembers what Maxine Bourgeardin told her. She tells the police what Maxine Bourgeardin told her. She told you about that conversation. Maxine Bourgeardin told you about that conversation. It all adds up. She clearly remembers it. But it's inconsequential, right? She can remember things like this. Now, if she's lost her memory, we'll talk about other things that she happens to remember that are inconsequential. How is she remembering these things? And it's because they don't matter. So she gets this phone call. She remembers calling Dan, that going unanswered. She remembers texting Dan, that going unanswered. She remembers calling Maxine Bourgeardine back. They have back and forth conversation a couple of times. And then she remembers calling Karen Brophy, and she remembers that conversation. And she remembers that Karen told her, you need to go downtown. And she says, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I do need to go down there. Now, why that's interesting is because here's some more lies by Nancy Brophy. She said to the detectives that when that phone call and that text message was unanswered, I knew something was wrong, and so I left. But that's not true. She didn't get an unanswered text from Dan, jump in the car, and drive downtown. It's just not true. It was quite a while before Karen Brophy insisted that she go down there. And you remember Nancy's response when Karen first told her that she needed to go down there, or asked her if she was going to go down there. Nancy didn't want to go down there because there was going to be too much police activity. So it's not until Karen prompts her to go down there. Now, what else does she remember? She remembers getting dressed. She remembers getting in her van. She remembers driving downtown, white knuckling on the way down there, playing with the radio. She remembers where she parked. She remembers getting out of her car, walking up to the police tape, interacting with police officers, being let in. She remembers all that. She remembers being hugged by the police officer. She remembers interacting with the detectives. She remembers getting into the police detective van. And she remembers where the detectives were even sitting. She remembers all of that because it's inconsequential. Now, one thing else she told you that she remembered is that before she got in that van, she knows she was not told that Dan Brophy was dead at that moment. She assumed, is what she told you. She assumed that based on how everyone was acting, everyone was looking at her, that Dan must be dead. Now think about this for a moment. She's this cognitive individual. She's the thinker, the planner, the researcher. Dr. Best told you, that type of person is not somebody who stands idly by. They ask questions. What's going on? Where is he? Is he okay? Somebody tell me something. Nothing. Didn't ask a single question. Didn't ask anybody. Is Dan okay? Where is he? And why? She doesn't need that information. She already knows. She knows he's dead. She knows exactly where he is. She doesn't need that information. So before she gets in the van, what else does she do that she remembers? She calls Karen, or Karen calls her, I can't remember. But she talks to Karen, and she tells Karen it's Dan. Dan's gone. Now, if she doesn't know with 100% certainty that Dan is dead, why in the world would you tell his mother that her son has been murdered? Because what if you're wrong? Nancy thought that was hilarious. We would laugh about it for years. It would be so funny. Sickening. She's telling somebody that their child is dead. But she doesn't really know. Now, why can she make a statement like that? Because she knows. She's very confident. I can tell Karen because I know. There's no chance that they're going to come back and say, actually, there's been a mistake. It's not Dan. So she can tell Karen that with certainty. And again, I'll just reiterate at this point, when she's going into that van, what they're telling her, they're treating her like a grieving widow at that point. Not a suspect. They're treating her like a 67-year-old woman who just lost her husband of 25 years. In fact, they take it so slow with her, they don't even tell her that it's Dan that's been killed until 7 minutes into the interview. And so what does she say about that? Is the audio not playing? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got
I
that when
kinda figured
everybody
you
gave
were
me the
gonna-
sad sack look.
Yeah.
So when they finally tell her, remember, no questions before this from her, no questions in the first 7 minutes. You have 2 homicide detectives talking to you. She doesn't have a single question. So they finally tell her, they break it to her slow, hey, we think that it's Dan. Dan's the one that's been killed. Oh, I figured. I kind of figured based on the sad sack look from others. That's her reaction. She just found out, supposedly, her husband of 25 years, who she adores, who they spent their entire case trying to convince you that they loved each other so much and their relationship was so perfect that she couldn't fathom Dan being gone. She just finds out that this man is gone. Oh, I figured. Now, does she need to burst out and cry? No. Everybody responds to trauma differently. You all probably individually respond differently. But oh, I figured, that's it. And to her questions, again, no questions, until over 40 minutes into the interview. 40 minutes into the interview, she says, where is he? It's an interesting question. Had to think about that one a lot. Why would she ask that? Well, it's probably the only question she doesn't know the answer to at that point. She doesn't know if they've moved him, if he's gone out of the building. She probably genuinely was curious. Where is he? And that's it. The only other question she has was he shot with an AR-15? No indication as to why you would ask a question like that. But was he shot with an AR-15? That's it. That's all she wanted to know. It's because that's all she needed to know. Nancy is the only person who could have committed this crime. As you saw in the opening slide, it looked like a puzzle that was put together mostly and appeared to look like a gun. That's what this case is. It's a puzzle. There's a lot of pieces to it. And as we move through this presentation, we're going to talk about what those puzzle pieces are. And when you put them all together, you have that picture. You can see that Nancy Brophy is the only one that could have done this. To start off, like we talked about briefly, she has all the knowledge in the world of Dan's routine. She knows his schedule. In fact, she emails it to the detectives later on. We'll get to that in a second. She knows his schedule. She knows what days he's planning on being early. She knows generally how he drives down to work. She knows everything that she would need to know to carry this out. Now, a lot of people knew that Dan was very routine. That's safe to say. A lot of friends, a lot of people that known them for years knew that Dan carried a routine and he pretty much stuck to it. But Nancy knew everything. She knew what he did when he got up in the morning. Now, this is where she does recall something where she's talking about what normally happens. She says he gets up early every morning. He walks the dogs, feeds the chickens. That's just kind of his routine. Very normal stuff. She also knows that it's going to take Dan almost precisely 10 minutes to drive to work. Something that she also later experienced with the detectives when they drove back, that this was a 10-minute drive. And of course she knows that. Now, what else does she know about Dan? She knows, like we talked about, it's an actual crime scene photo that Dan parks right there. He parks in front of the school on 17th. She knows that. She knows that he would enter that same door because that's where the alarm panel is, and that he would unload things. She also was very precise when she told the detectives that he would have this cup, that he always carried this big cup filled with tea. She knows him so well that she knows what he's drinking on any given day. She also knew on this particular day, like we talked about with the live fire, that he would be bringing carts. He had things that he needed to bring in. So it stands to reason, as you can see in an older Google photo, there's Dan's truck, and he parks near the roll-up doors sometimes. Because this is how he gets things in and out of the building. She also would know that he's responsible as the first person there to set up the coffee station and water station. Now, Nancy clearly, moving over to the second puzzle piece, has knowledge of the Culinary Institute. You've seen the map. You've seen people talk about it. So specifically, I asked Nancy, well, is there anywhere in this building you haven't been? And all she could really say was, I haven't really been in this area and these little storerooms. It's kind of the only place she wasn't really familiar with. She admittedly, here in court, knows this layout. Now, even if she didn't have the knowledge of every nook and cranny of this building, she was there 3 weeks prior. She told the detectives that. She told you that on the stand. Now, what I'm presenting to you is that either, I think this is less likely, she went down there at 7:30 in the morning, that morning, to kill Dan and was interrupted. Somebody was there. So she had to just, well, I'm just here to use the bathroom. I was meeting a client. I'm leaving. I think that's less likely given the time frame. But it certainly could have been a dry run. She doesn't go to the Culinary Institute at 7:30 in the morning. Just doesn't happen. But that morning, a few weeks before she commits the murder, she's down there getting herself into the building, getting herself into an area of a building where she could view what she needed to see. Now, if she's already familiar with the building, why would she need to do that? Well, she probably wants to double check and make sure there's no cameras. What if they installed cameras recently and she didn't know that? So that afforded her an opportunity to go inside that building, which Dan let her in, if you recall, and to go use the restrooms, take a peek around, make sure that when she comes back to kill Dan, that she is going to be fine, that she's not going to be seen. Now, what she also knows about the Culinary Institute is that nobody's going to be there on Saturday. Dan's going to be the first one there. Nobody's going to be there. Yeah, I do. The custodian only comes in on Sunday. And as you saw, discussion of the alarm panel, yeah, I do was not there on Saturday. He did not come there and clean that morning. So she knows Dan's going to be there alone on Saturday. That's why she has to do it on a Saturday. So when we come back out and we look at, did I skip over? When we're looking at what she would have seen when she comes in that roll-up door. Remember, we talked about the Culinary Institute. We talked about it being a labyrinth. It's very confusing. Look at what she would have seen when she walked in the roll-up door, or what a stranger would have seen. Now you see on the left there, you see the roll-up door, and the right is a picture once you step inside that roll-up door and looking into the Culinary Institute. So just to be clear, looking at the roll-up door, and then on the right, that's looking in. It's not obvious where you would need to go to get into the rest of that building. You can see up there, there's a door on the left, and then straight ahead, clearly a cooler door, but nonetheless another door, but a door on the left. But as you walk up towards those doors, just to the left is this very narrow hallway. This hallway right here, which you heard some testimony of. This door is usually closed because this is not an area that the students are really supposed to be in. But Nancy's familiar with this. Nancy knows that she can access the rest of the building by walking down that hallway to the main area. And when she gets to this hallway, she can head straight back. This is that coffee station right here. And that's the kitchen where Dan is. Now, when she goes into that kitchen, presumably she doesn't want to disturb Dan. If he's standing at the kitchen sink, preparing the ice and the water, she doesn't want to disturb Dan. And clearly he's not disturbed. It doesn't appear he turned around at all. It doesn't appear that there was any interaction. But think about this. She knows that even if she got his attention, he's not going to be disturbed by that. He could very well have turned around and looked at Nancy, knows her, loves her, trusts her, turn his back to her, and go back to what he was doing. There's no risk for Nancy disturbing Dan and having this go wrong. Now, when you look at what kind of opportunity Nancy had, this kind of builds on the last section. What kind of opportunity did Nancy have to actually carry out this murder? She has the knowledge of his routine. She has the knowledge of the Culinary Institute. So what kind of opportunity did she actually have? Well, again, this is the email that she sent to Detective Posey laying out Dan's schedule. Take a close look at the highlighted area there. We know he's killed on Saturday, June 2nd. Dan only is going to be working 2 more weekends. And then he's going back to days. So she has a very narrow window. She has to carry it out this weekend, June 2nd, or she only has the 16th, the 9th or the 16th. That's it. So why choose the 2nd? Well, one, she has 2 more weekends in case something goes wrong, but it's also her best chance to have the most time because it's the live fire and it's the time that Dan's supposed to be there early. Picking June 2nd wasn't a mistake or a fluke or luck. It was intentional. It was all part of her plan. Now, as the weekend class, she knows the weekend classes are going to end. So like I said, she comes down there a few weeks earlier, probably to do a little bit of recon, make sure everything's in place and that she's going to be good. So think about that when we talk about opportunity. Is she the only person in the world that had an opportunity to kill Dan? Could somebody have randomly walked in that 6-minute window and shot Dan? Is it physically possible? Yes. You have to think about what reasonable doubt means, though. Reasonable. Is it reasonable that a random person over Nancy Brophy is the one who did this and had the opportunity to do it? Now, just because somebody has the opportunity doesn't make them a killer, of course. But think about a random person in this scenario. A random person who gets lucky in the 6-minute window. They walk through the roll-up door. They apparently have no intentions of stealing anything. They walk through this door, navigate their way this way, head back, find Dan, do not confront him, do not startle him. Think about that. Had Dan just turned and what is this person doing? We'd have a much different crime scene. There's no sign of a struggle. There's no sign of a robbery. Nothing. So this person would have had to get lucky enough to be able to walk into this kitchen, not have Dan even turn his head, to be able to shoot him in the back. Then once Dan is paralyzed and laying on his back, staring at the ceiling, walk over to him again and shoot him in the chest. Random person, no motive. That's what you'd have to believe. And it's just simply not reasonable. So what else is defense trying to get you to believe? They spend a great deal of time talking about a gentleman named Oscar Taylor. So is it Oscar Taylor? Well, Oscar Taylor's in the area, yeah. Again, he has no knowledge of the interior of the Culinary Institute. We have no evidence to suggest he knows Dan. In fact, if he's wanting money or food, Dan's the type of guy that would give it to him. Very generous person who routinely is giving. So it's not a confrontation in the sense of, hey, give me money, or can you give me money or food, and there's a confrontation and then Oscar Taylor just decides to shoot Dan. No evidence of that. That doesn't even make sense. What's Oscar Taylor doing that morning? He's canning. He's a homeless guy who was sleeping in the area, who gets up and is canning, presumably to turn those cans in and get some money. So he's walking around canning. He goes into Starbucks, buys a cup of coffee, leaves, continues canning. You'll see in the Bellagio's video, he stops at the corner. He then crosses the street, goes up to Madison, continues canning. Now what defense will have you believe here is at this point, he sees Dan arrive, he follows Dan in, murders him, doesn't take the $66 from his pocket, doesn't take his wallet, doesn't take his phone, doesn't take his car keys, doesn't disturb anything in the school, walks back out of the school, and goes back to canning. Because Miranda Bernhard told you when she arrived at 7:29 and she came around the corner, she saw somebody matching the description of Oscar Taylor on Madison Street canning. Now, defense said, well, but this is a criminal. This guy, he commits robberies. So Detective Merrill says, well, yes, he has committed robberies before. Never uses a gun. Never uses a gun. Type of robberies he commits is when he steals a candy and pushes the clerk. Robbery. And he gets caught all the time. So that's his lengthy criminal history. Old man Oscar Taylor steals and gets caught. No evidence that this guy's carrying a gun. No evidence that he has any beef with Dan. No evidence that he had any actual opportunity, knowledge, plan, or motive to kill Dan. Because all that belongs to Nancy Brophy. Now, you were just instructed about fears and biases that you might have that you have to leave outside of the courtroom, leave outside of your deliberations. Your fears and biases are exactly what the defense attorneys are asking you to do. You should be offended. They're asking you to consider the black guy in the neighborhood as the killer, without any evidence. They want you to consider the stereotypes that happen in this country about black people and guns. That's what they're asking you to do, and you should be offended. One thing Oscar Taylor did do is acknowledge that he was in the area. Yeah, I was there. Unlike Nancy Brophy. So what else do we have in puzzle pieces? We have Nancy has the murder weapon. When she gives this gun to the police, what did the police tell you? It's out of battery. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means the slide wasn't put back on the right way. What should that gun look like when it has a zip tie on and the slide and barrel is put back on correctly? It should look like this. Slide and barrel should be back off of the back of the frame. It shouldn't look like that. Now, why was that interesting to the police? And why was it brought up here in this trial? Because Nancy Brophy told the police that she bought that gun. It was heavy. It was ugly. She realized that they didn't want it. So what did she do with it? She puts it back in the case, puts it back in the original bag, this scary gun, and she throws it in the closet where it still sits to this day on June 2nd. That's what she told the police. Now, if you're confused a little bit, it's okay. Because she sat up here on the stand and said, oh no, I was probably exaggerating. I played with it. I handled it. Dan and I went back and forth for weeks about whether we wanted it or not. I even took the slide and barrel off. Hold on. It's the first time we're hearing about this. You didn't tell the police that you took the slide and barrel off. You didn't tell your friends that you've manipulated this gun for research or for whatever. Now you take the slide and barrel off? Well, yeah, of course. Because by the time she's here and she's sitting up there and she has to tell you that story to convince you that she's not guilty, she has to have a reason why that gun is out of battery when she gives it to the police. She knows she can't say I didn't touch it or I didn't handle it because that doesn't make any sense. So she has to come up with a story. Oh no, I did actually take off the slide and barrel. Now one thing I'll give her, that's true. She did take off the slide and barrel. She took off the slide and barrel in order to put on the slide and barrel from eBay to kill her husband. And then when she gets back on the morning of the murder, she's in such a hurry to switch these slide and barrels back, she makes a mistake. In her haste to get that original slide and barrel back on, she fails to fully seat the gun. And that's why it goes to the police that way. But again, it's a new story. So knowing Nancy has the capability, having the murder weapon, how did we get here? We need to go back and look at how the plan all started. Now, just briefly, I'll touch on this. Nancy Brophy, I think, could be described as it was by Dr. Warford, an intelligent person, somebody who thinks things through. Miss Brophy talks herself about how she does research for her books, how she plans out whole books in her head. But then she got on the stand and she took this position of, I don't plan. I don't plan things. Yeah, I'm not a planner. I just roll with it. Why would she tell you that? It's such a bizarre thing to say when everything that we know about her would indicate that's exactly who she is. But she can't sit up here and say that she's a planner to you, because if she's not a planner, then how could she plan a murder? But she's lying to you. She is a planner. She ran a catering company. You're going to tell me somebody who's running a catering company doesn't plan? Don't plan for how much food you're going to need? Plan your staff? Plan the times? Plan everything you're going to... She was the owner. It's not like she just worked there. She ran 25 employees, I think. $500,000 in business, but doesn't plan anything. Just doesn't make sense. It's another one of Nancy's lies. Judge, I forgot to ask you, do you want us to find a place to break? I could probably do that in a few minutes.
Sure.
Okay. Actually, probably now would be better.
All right, why don't we take our morning break, and let's be back on the record at 5 after 11.
Okay, we'll go off record and,
Thank you. You may be seated or you may remain standing until Judge Ramirez takes the bench in just another minute.
I know, I realize that.
All rise.
All right, please be seated. And before we call the jury back, just so the sides sort of know what I'm thinking logistically, I'm not sure. Oh, the jury is back. All right, then never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, before you do, I mean, this is nothing that needs to be secret from the jury anyways. What I was thinking is that likely, depending on when the state concludes their closing argument, whether it be before or afternoon, we'll likely take our lunch break then and have defense give their closing argument after lunch. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. All right, so before the break, I started to talk to you about, now that we know that Nancy has the knowledge and we know that she has the opportunity, we're going to talk about planning and how we got to where we are. And I talked to you about Nancy being known for a planner. I want to walk you through a timeline, though, and what's going on with the Brophies at this time. So before we get to December 24th, 2017, remember what you heard. The Brophies started having their financial struggles, really, the real financial struggles, in June of 2016. They started having problems paying their mortgage. Things weren't looking so good for them at that time. And as Nancy put it, that was the worst financial struggles that she's ever experienced in her life. So think about that for a second. 65 years old, having the worst financial struggle she's ever experienced in her life, and you're not thinking that that's going to cause some extreme stress. She's got a problem. And remember, Nancy's a problem solver. And so she's going to have to solve this problem of their finances. Now, in October of 2017, remember what the big plan was? We're going to borrow against our 401k. That's not the first time they borrow against something. To fix their financial struggles, Nancy draws against an insurance policy. She takes the maximum allowed out against that insurance policy. Think about that. She's saying, I'm paying into this particular type of insurance policy because it's forced. It's forced savings. But then they're just drawing the money out against it. It's because they're desperate. And in that desperation, when they realize that's not enough money, they have to draw out this $35,000 off the 401k. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I just want you to understand what's going on with them as Nancy's really starting to feel the struggle, really starting to feel the desperation. Even with that $35,000 they got in October, Nancy can see the writing on the wall. It's not going to get better. In fact, because they're drawing these loans, things are just going to get worse. They're going to be in a worse financial situation when that money's gone. And Nancy knows that. So what does she do in November of 2017? She gets online. She has an idea in her head. And she starts looking for guns. Now, once she's thought about this idea that, well, there's a lot of life insurance money here, I'll get the house. Maybe this idea of killing Dan, maybe it's something she's going to look into. But it's not that simple. You can't just do it if you want to go undetected. So she gets online and she starts researching ghost guns. Now, what is she not doing? She's not talking to friends and family about ghost gun purchases or what ghost guns are or the fact that they're unserialized and unregistered. She's not talking about that. She thinks that Nathaniel, in fact, has built one of these ghost guns before. She doesn't start there. So right from the get-go, this idea that it's research doesn't really add up. She's looking for a gun that can be bought that is not going to be traced back to her. So she finds herself on this Ghost Guns website. She goes there several times, in fact, between November and the time she purchases it on December 24th. She goes to this website, and this is what she sees. They're advertised, unserialized, unregistered. She bounces around that website a little bit, back and forth over that month. And then finally, on December 24th, she decides, I'm going to buy this gun. And it gets shipped to their house, and she gets it in early January. And as we stare in these pictures, one thing to keep in mind, she paid over $600 for this ghost gun. A gun that she could have walked down to the gun show if she wanted a complete gun, or a gun store. And as she showed you, she bought a Glock 17 fully intact for about $500. So she's overpaying for a gun because it's unserialized and unregistered. Now, where did we find that gun? Nancy said she packed this box, and inside this box are scarves, purses, and GK. There's a couple takeaways from this photo. One is it clearly says purses, and the detective said, I found purses in there. Now think about back to Nancy's testimony when I asked her a pretty innocuous question. Do you carry a purse? Seems pretty simple. Doesn't seem loaded at all, does it? But Nancy was thinking 2 steps ahead of me. Because she's intelligent, she wants to manipulate the situation. So what does she do? She jumps ahead and says, oh, nope, I don't carry a purse. Very adamant to you that she does not carry a purse. She just keeps everything in her bra. Now, one, she clearly has purses. Doesn't mean she carries one every day. I'm not saying that. She clearly has purses. But why didn't she want you to think that she carries a purse? Because she's thinking ahead, and she doesn't want the implication to be that she walks into the Culinary Institute with a gun in her purse. Because that's how she could carry that in there without anybody seeing it. Which is precisely probably what she did. But she wanted to make sure that you didn't think that this is a person that carries a purse. And so how could she walk into the Culinary Institute with a gun and have it go unseen? The second takeaway from this photo is she marks the box GK. Now on its surface, I'm assuming before this trial, if you saw a box and it said GK, you wouldn't have the slightest clue what that meant. It could mean all kinds of things. Nancy said she marked this box for law enforcement. In reality, Nancy marked it for herself in code, in an acronym, to ensure she knew where that was when she needed to go back to it. That's why it's marked. She didn't mark this for the police. What kind of ridiculous proposition was that? The police might need it? Why? If this is a gun she bought, never built, and is just using it for research, why would the cops be interested in this gun kit? But in her mind, she's thinking, well, they might come knocking, and I'm going to have to give them this gun kit. It doesn't make any sense. Now, she's doing that for the police's benefit, she said. But later on, when she gets the eBay gun, or slide and barrel, she'll know where that is. Why isn't that important to the police? Why didn't she mark that one for the police? She just doesn't know where it is. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Now, what's going on with the ghost gun? How is this fitting into the plan? Well, in Nancy's mind, this is great. I'll get this ghost gun. It's unserialized, unregistered. The only way police would ever know I had it is if they tracked down my banking somehow, but why would they do that unless there's some other evidence? So I can just build this ghost gun. I have a murder weapon. I can get rid of it. If somebody finds it, there'll be no way to tie it back to me. If somebody finds this completed gun in a river, in a field, buried somewhere in the trash, they pick it up. Because it's unserialized and unregistered, it's tied to no one. It's a great plan. The problem for Nancy is she underestimated how difficult it was going to be to build. As you saw when we passed around that baggie of parts, that was just one baggie. There are several in that box. Now the slide and barrel is completely intact. But she had to build that lower unit. She didn't have the equipment. She said, I don't have the drill press, and Dan said, we don't have the drill press. And she didn't have the skills. She just didn't possess the skills. Now, she doesn't need to abandon the ghost gun completely. She can then switch gears because now she has an unserialized and unregistered slide and barrel that's fully intact. She can switch gears and say, well, I'm going to go and buy legitimately a full firearm. Now, what she's doing in the meantime, before she buys that full firearm, and this is very important, she's doing some Google searching. And look at January 29th, kickback with Glock. Now at this point, she doesn't own a full gun yet, right? She just has the gun kit that she did not build. So on January 29th, she's Googling kickback with Glock. Now what is going on with Nancy at that time that she's Googling this? She sat up here and told you, I bought that gun kit, but I wasn't ready to write yet. She wasn't doing any research towards that book. So Googling kickback with Glock is not research. Now, is it because she's about to buy a full gun? Well, she told you that she didn't decide to buy a full gun until the Parkland school shooting on February 14th. So why is she searching kickback with Glock in January? In fact, searching 2 times for kickbacks and kickback with Glocks on January 29th. Now, what did she tell you she learned about the kickback with Glocks? She told you that she learned at the gun show that the Glock 17 has less of a kickback. Easier to handle, better for a woman. That's what she said. Now, she probably didn't actually learn that at a gun show, though there may have been some discussion about it, because she's already Googled it. She knows back on January 29th that a Glock 17 is going to have less kickback. If she goes to those websites that are coming up, she's probably learning that Glock 17s have less kickback. Why does that matter? Because when she goes to the gun show, although she says I'm looking for a Glock 19, she's probably looking for a Glock 17. Because now she knows it has less kickback. And she thinks that's the difference between a Glock 17 and a Glock 19. Not realizing that the barrels are slightly different length. As you saw, I held these up in court when Nancy was testifying. They are nearly identical. The width, when you look at it, they're nearly identical. So if Nancy has now decided, well, I'm just going to buy a Glock 17, it has less kickback, it makes more sense for me as not a avid gun person, and I'll just put this slide and barrel on there. It looks the same. So she heads to the gun show. I'm sorry. I want to look at a couple searches first. So as she's doing this research, learning how the kickback of the Glock 17 is less. So now she's thinking, well, I'm going to get a Glock 17. That's the gun I'm going to purchase. Now again, pointing out the time, February 1st. This is not after February 14th after the school shooting. She's doing this research before that. She's intending to buy a Glock 17. She wants to know how much they cost, and she wants to know what the registration requirements are in Oregon. Now again, they offered no explanation in this courtroom as to why she's doing those searches. Defense alluded to some sort of research after hearing about the Las Vegas shooter. That's not evidence. Nancy didn't tell you that. She had all the time in the world to sit up there and have that question posed to her, and she never said to you why she's doing that research. Then on February 15th, still, now this is a day after the Parkland school shooting, but before she goes to the gun show, she's doing that research, right? How much does a Glock 17 cost? When do you have to register it? And what she's realizing when she visits a site called gunbroker.com, she visits that site on the 15th. And what she realizes is that you can't buy a complete gun online. At this point, Nancy is wanting to keep her purchases online. She doesn't want to go to a gun store. She doesn't want to go to a gun show. She wants to keep her purchases online, more anonymous. So she's searching and she goes to gunbroker.com. She's realizing you can't buy a full gun online. So now what? If I can't buy a full Glock 17 online to put my ghost gun slide and barrel on, what do I do now? Well, she turns to the gun show. I'm sorry, actually go back to that one, I'm sorry. She does later search how to sell a gun in Oregon, but that's not done until the 20th. So I'm going to go back to the gun show. On the 17th, she visits the gun show. Now think about her plan at this point. It's okay for Nancy to go to the gun show and buy a gun. It's not going to necessarily raise any red flags. She goes through the background check, she gets her gun, she can take that home. She's going to switch out the slide and barrel from the ghost gun, not knowing that it doesn't fit. Now, even if you believe what Miss Brophy said about what was said at the gun show, she said even they told her that the Glock 17 had less kickback. It's the gun that makes the most sense for her. So when she gets home with that Glock 17, remember this is a Saturday, Dan's at work when she goes to the gun show. Presumably Dan worked on Sunday as well. Nancy Brophy has the opportunity to come home, get the ghost gun out, take the slide and barrel off of this gun, and realize it doesn't fit. It's a ½ inch too short. Everything else is the same, but it doesn't fit. She has to abandon the plan with the ghost gun. Now, while these pictures are up, I just want to point out that she made it a point with Detective Beniga when they were back at the house. When she said, here's the gun, he takes a picture, she tells him to flip it over to make sure that he sees the zip tie that's still intact. Her whole plan is to switch out the slide and barrel. It's been the plan. Even though it went through different iterations, that's been the plan. So she wants to make sure that detectives know that this isn't the murder weapon. Here's the only gun I've ever bought, and it's not the murder weapon. Here you go. What's interesting about Miss Brophy's whole plan and her story about she buys the ghost gun for research, then as she's going through this process, she realized they want to buy a gun, and they realized that after the Parkland school shooting, that's the time to do it. And I asked her, you know, defense established that Miss Brophy is sort of a left of center leaning individual. Seemed to be a bit of a joke, maybe a little farther left than they let on. And her response to gun violence in this country was for her to buy a gun. Okay, but it wasn't for Dan to take to work. They never had a plan, according to Miss Brophy, to take this gun to work. They didn't even buy bullets for it. It's just at home. How is that protecting you? Now, she said she's mad at the gun because it didn't do its job. A bunch of stories, a bunch of things that are said designed to distract you, to confuse you. But you have to understand what's going on at the time that Miss Brophy is doing this. Again, she's not doing research. She was very clear. I'm not researching at this time. Now, there's a couple possibilities, right? Plan number one is she was just going to use the ghost gun outright. Plan number two, get a Glock 17, put the ghost gun slide and barrel on it. That didn't work, so now I have to move to plan three. Even if you don't think she was going to use the ghost gun slide and barrel and she just abandoned that altogether and decided to go with Glock 17, fine, doesn't really matter. But the plan's the same. But I think it's likely that Miss Brophy tries the Glock 19 slide and barrel from ghost guns, puts it on the gun, or tries to, realizes it doesn't happen, and now she needs a new plan. So what does she do? On the 19th and on the 20th, she starts looking online again. Now she's looking for just a Glock 17 slide and barrel. She doesn't go back to the gun show and buy just a slide and barrel, as they told you they sell. Or wait till the next gun show. I suppose that one would be over by then. She doesn't go into a gun store and just try to buy a slide and barrel. Nope, she returns to the internet. She's back online. She's researching and looking for Glock 17 slides and barrel for sale. Now, she tells you, now we're back to writing, right? Because whatever benefits Miss Brophy in this courtroom here, she's going to bounce around. Writing, I'm preparing for my own safety, and then I'm back to writing just days later. But she just told you, I'm not researching. So what's interesting about this theory, right? She has this gun. She has a fully intact slide and barrel that she told you she removed, so she knows how to do it. And she has a slide and barrel that she can manipulate all she wants. But she said she doesn't want to use this one. Really without much of an explanation. Something about didn't want to take it apart because she wouldn't be able to put it back together. Something like that. I think she's more or less talking about the lower frame. That is very complicated. But why not the slide and barrel? It's metal. What is she going to do to it? So because of that, because it's such, they just want to leave this one alone, I'm just going to buy another identical piece of firearm part. She's doing that while she owns this, right here in the kit. And what are you going to do with this? What are you going to do with this? That's it. That's what she was so afraid of doing? She was going to ruin it? Going to ruin this? This is what she wanted to buy. She had to spend another $300 and something so that she could have another one of these. And she owns 2 of them. And what did she tell you at that point? Because that doesn't sound good, right? Doesn't sound good for Nancy. Well, I was obsessed with guns at this point. So this person went from hating guns, so much so that when she was married to a cop, she didn't allow a gun in the house. Now that was a long time ago, fair enough. Fast forward, never owned a gun, didn't have any desire to own a gun, didn't talk to friends and family about guns, didn't go to family members who had guns and ask them for help and maybe show me some guns, doesn't go to the friends that clearly have guns that could have shown her. She doesn't go to the gun stores to look at guns. She doesn't just go to the gun show to look at guns. She went there just to buy one. She doesn't go to Threat Dynamics where they have 75 guns available for rental to check out what kind of gun you would want. She just goes 0 to 100. Now I'm buying guns, now I'm buying gun parts because I'm obsessed with guns. It makes no sense that at 67 years old, she decided to become a gun nut. Just like that. Spending over $1,500 in gun parts and guns when they don't have any money. Making sure she's paying those insurance premiums, but they don't have any money. They're not paying their mortgage, but she's buying guns? It doesn't make any sense. And why are you buying the exact same parts that you already own? And oh, it's the one part that has not been recovered. The one piece. And what does Nancy have to say about that? Don't know. Don't remember. You know where all your other gun parts are. You're a gun nut. You know what's going on, but you just don't. I haven't seen it. Didn't bother asking questions. Hey, who took that? Call up your friends and your family who were in the house. Hey, somebody take a gun part? It's missing. The police might want it, like she said about the ghost gun. Maybe they might want to see that. So what's going on at the time that she buys this slide and barrel? What's happening? Remember, she goes on a retreat. She goes on a retreat to Rockaway Beach, where she discloses to her friends on that drive that she's developing some story, even though, according to her on the stand, she was not. She's developing some story, and she bought a ghost gun. The big revelation. She bought a ghost gun. And the defense is asserting, well, why would she tell anybody she had a ghost gun if it was part of the murder plan? Because by the time she's going on the retreat, it's not. It's not part of the plan at all anymore. She's abandoned it. By the time she's on that retreat, she has purchased the gun at the gun show, and she's actively bidding and nearing completion of the slide and barrel on eBay. new plan's in place. She can disclose the ghost gun. Probably pretty smart too, right? What if the cops do discover that purchase? That might look really bad. So you tell friends about it. Hey, I bought this ghost gun. But she doesn't do it before that. She doesn't tell people after she bought it, hey, I bought this ghost gun for a present for myself on Christmas Eve while my husband's at work. She didn't tell anybody about it until that retreat. And then she doesn't tell anybody else about it until sometime between, I think the testimony was between March and May. That's the only time she discloses the ghost gun. At that point, after that retreat, she's now not only has the knowledge and the opportunity, but now she's got a pretty solid plan. She can take this gun, swap out the sliding barrel, shoot her husband, swap out the sliding barrel again with the original, knowing that it's not going to be traced back, and just get rid of it. Just get rid of the sliding barrel from eBay. It doesn't require a background check. It's not registered anywhere, just like the ghost gun. It's not traced anywhere. So if somebody finds that sliding barrel in the bottom of a river or somewhere else, nobody's going to know who it belongs to. It's a decent plan. So when we look forward to what that plan finally looks like, you go back to the timeline. She's got the knowledge, she's got the motive, the opportunity, and she's got this plan that's developing and it's nearing completion. The only thing Nancy doesn't have is really any experience with firearms. She said she doesn't handle them her whole life, and she's never sought out really any plan to use firearms. She got to practice. You can't just walk in the first time shooting somebody in the back and it be the first time you're pulling the trigger. She's got to practice. Now, she told you I never bought any ammunition. She told the police she never bought any ammunition. She said you just put it away and never used it. However, her research would suggest that she did a lot of searching for YouTube videos on how to disassemble, clean, load a firearm, load a Glock specifically. Now, there was a search term on March 26th that came up that appeared that Ms. Brophy was searching for how to load a Glock 9mm. Now, you heard the defense expert say, well, not sure she was actually searching that at that time, because it was like this download of 1,000 items about the same time. And so I asked, well, it doesn't mean she didn't search for it, right? It just means it happened sometime prior. Yes. Okay, fair enough. I'm not asking you to believe that that search happened at 10:13 a.m. on March 26th. I'm not asking you to do that. It probably happened sometime prior. But the bottom line is, the takeaway point here is, it happened. She searched how to load a Glock 9mm. Also, she probably didn't need to. I mean, magazines are pretty simple. You put a bullet in, you push it down, put another one in. It's not that hard. But assuming she didn't know how to do it, she at least had the opportunity at some time prior to this March 26th. And before this, on March 11th, that's when she was going to those YouTube videos, right? Those YouTube videos that we watched, some of them in here. And the defense expert said, well, I can't tell you exactly how much she watched, but she spent this much time on each of those videos. And so what I ask you to take away from that is, we don't know which part of the video she was watching. She could have clicked around through and watched it. But one of the videos that you did watch was, I think it was 49 seconds. And the first 49 seconds was how to take off the sliding barrel. It was very quick. She doesn't need to watch these full videos. She has a very specific purpose that she needs to spend time online researching. She needs to know how to take off the sliding barrel. She needs to know how to load it. That's really all she needs to know. So it doesn't really matter how much time she spent on these videos. But nonetheless, she's researching it. She's searching for them. And again, not for her research for her book, because she's not doing that at that time. So you get to March 26th. She's done this research. She's been told by the gun show gun sellers that this is a place that you can go out and shoot. It was written on the back of that receipt. You have that receipt in evidence. You can take a look at it. It's very scribbled, kind of hard to read. But nonetheless, it's directions to this shooting range. Also on that same receipt is a recommendation to go to Threat Dynamics. But Nancy doesn't go to Threat Dynamics, a place where she could have used a simulator to practice, a place where she could have brought her own firearm to practice with at a firing range right there. She didn't do that. Why? Because she has to check in. She has to give them her ID. There'll be evidence that she went to a place to go practice shooting. And that doesn't fit with her narrative that she hated the gun and she didn't want it anymore and that she just put it away. So she can't go somewhere where she's going to have to check in. So she goes out to this place on the 26th. Now it's pretty obvious her phone is tracking out Highway 26 as it heads out to this area. But I will say, she didn't spend enough time there on the 26th to shoot a gun. It appears from her phone records that she drove out there, turned around and drove back, and went and met that friend at lunch. But what do we know about Nancy? She's a planner and a researcher. She drove out there, saw where it was, saw where she needed to go, saw what the conditions were up that road, saw that she could get out and not have to interact with anybody, and she could go shoot her gun. There's enough time to do that. And remember, this is a Monday when Dan's at work. She doesn't go on a day that they could both go up there and shoot the gun or even just check it out. She does it when Dan's at work. Now, Tuesday rolls around. She knows where this is. She knows what it looks like. She knows what she needs to do. Throw some rounds in that magazine. Head on out there. You don't need to be there very long at all. Detective Merrill and I went through some exercise about what it would take, how long it would take to shoot. We got a little crazy with it on how much you could actually shoot, but the point was you don't need much time to shoot a few rounds. I mean, in the kit itself, she has 3 magazines. She could have easily loaded 5 or 6 rounds each magazine, not taking much effort. And she could have went out there, 6 rounds, boom, 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 boom. And let me show you how hard it is to switch magazines. You hit the button, it comes out, take the other one, and you slide it in, and you're ready to go. Seconds. Another 6 rounds, switch it out, another 6 rounds. I don't know how many she shot. Maybe she only shot a couple, maybe she shot 3 full magazines, I don't know. But I'm guessing that she wanted to make sure that she wasn't really seen by many people. That's why she goes out on a Tuesday morning at that point to the public range. She knows she doesn't have to check in with anybody. She can fire off a few rounds. Now she's got the practice and she can leave. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. But Nancy didn't acknowledge that that's what she did. Nancy told the police, never shot it, never shot the gun. She sat here on the stand and said, what about that? I don't remember. She once again doesn't remember a critical time. Now what does she say? Well, I don't remember, but we were looking for property. We weren't working with a realtor. I just go and drive around without Dan. Just go drive around because I know he likes that area. Problem with that is it was pretty well established. That's state forest land. What kind of land are you going to buy in state forest land? Unless the state decides to sell you a piece of it, I'm guessing none. But that's her reason. That's why I'm out there. I like that area. I go to Vernonia all the time. I think was the exact quote. Now we know she's not in Vernonia on the 26th and 27th because she's not hitting off any towers near Vernonia. We also know that she's lying to you. She didn't go to Vernonia all the time. And remember, the phone records that were checked went back to December. Is it possible she went to Vernonia all the time before that? Sure. But this time frame, this 6 months between December and June of 2018, that's when this plan's in place, right? That's when we're going to get ready to sell the house and we're going to move. Isn't that when she's going out and looking? Isn't she driving around Vernonia and driving around out in that area looking at that time? Problem is she's not. She doesn't go to Vernonia a single time. And what did Kelsey Guay tell you first or second time she testified? Nancy Brophy's phone often goes to the coast. In that same 6-month time frame, the only time it doesn't go all the way to the coast when it heads out Highway 26 is on March 26th and 27th. So this idea that she's out there driving around, being her own realtor, just looking at property, it's a lie. Just a bold-faced lie. So what does Nancy have at this point? Because Nancy's got to research, Nancy's got a plan. So what does she know now? She knows how to load a Glock 17. She knows how to handle a Glock 17. She knows how to fire a Glock 17. She knows how to disassemble a Glock 17. She knows how to clean a Glock 17. And above all else, she knows that she has to get rid of that sliding barrel. The plan is in place. She's ready. Two critical puzzle pieces for your picture is right here. It became simple once she got worked through it. But simply swap out the sliding barrel. Why? Because as Leland Samuelson, our expert, told you, the sliding barrel is what leaves the markings on the shell casings. Not the lower half of the gun. The lower half doesn't matter. It's the upper half. It's the sliding barrel that leaves the shell casing markings. Nancy knows that, and Nancy knows that if she just gets rid of that, the shell casings that they're going to find at the crime scene, which she left undisturbed, are not going to match her gun. She also knows that they're not going to match the ghost gun sliding barrel. And they didn't. That's why she doesn't get rid of them. What does she know they're going to match? The eBay sliding barrel. She can't remember what happened to it. It's gone.
Alrighty.
That's all it took for Nancy to carry out that plan that we just discussed. Seconds. She did it in 2 different parts, right? Switch out the sliding barrel before she heads down to the Culinary Institute, and then switch it back when she gets home. Not hard. Then after she does that switch, she can get in her van, drive around the neighborhood, and have the neighbors see her. Her plan's complete. Now, I'm going to go back to the charge. We talked about how it's actually fairly simple, right? 2 elements, most of it not in dispute. But what's not on there? What defense is going to spend, I'm sure, is what is quite a bit of time in their closing argument. Motive. Motive is not on here. The state does not have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, it doesn't have to prove any motive at all. I could stop my closing argument right now and say, I showed you all of the proof that you need to prove that Nancy Brophy murdered her husband. And that could be that. I don't have any other obligation. But motive is something we as human beings want. You want to know why. Why would Nancy do this? That's a natural feeling. I'm not going to argue with you about that. Just because the law doesn't require me to prove it, it doesn't mean that it's not a natural feeling that I understand. You want to know why. And what the why does help you conclude is that if you understand the motive, it will help you understand that Nancy Brophy absolutely committed this crime, without any doubt. But one word of caution: motive to Nancy Brophy might not mean motive to you. It might not be enough to say, well, I wouldn't do that. I'm sorry. I wouldn't do that. That's not enough for me. You have to put yourself in Nancy's shoes. Is it her motive? Is it motive that makes sense to her why she would do this? So we're going to talk about motive. We're going to go through the why. Why would Nancy Brophy feel so desperate in their situation that the only way out was to murder Dan? And what I will say right up from the front, it's not just about money. It's not. Defense counsel has argued, I believe in their opening, and I believe they'll probably argue it again here, that we are coming from the position that Nancy Brophy only murdered her husband because of life insurance. And that's not true. I'm not putting that forward. That was a piece of it, but there's so much more to it than just the money. So I'm going to briefly talk about life insurance. I'm sure you are all sick of hearing of life insurance, so I am not going to belabor it, I promise you. But I do have to point out a couple of things, and some that aren't necessarily even related to life insurance, but within the life insurance context. So the first thing is what kicks off this idea that there's life insurance at all. Go ahead.
Okay.
I don't want to do, but this may give you a laugh this afternoon. I don't want to be the stupid question of the day, but I think I need to be the stupid question of the day. So my insurance company said, well, just have the detective write a letter that you're no longer a suspect. And I said, man, I just don't know that he's there. And I'm not sure that he looks at it that way. But if you do, I'd get you to write the letter. My sister, when I told her this as a lawyer, laughed so hard she fell out of the chair. So
Why would you need that?
Because they don't want to pay if it turns out that I secretly slipped down to the school and shot my husband.
There's more. It's okay. So the one thing I wanted to point out there is you listen to Nancy calling Detective Posey only disclosing the $140,000 policy. That's part of it. She doesn't disclose the other policies, despite the fact that she called all the other insurance companies the same day. She only points out the $40,000 policy. Why? Because it's the smallest one. It's the least suspicious. Now what we know, oh, and she says, my insurance company. Not one of them, not one of the many life insurance companies that I deal with or dealt with today. One of them is requiring this letter. Now, what do we know about the life insurance? Well, after a lot of testimony to get to a pretty easy point, and we're just going to show you Defense Exhibit 288. The agreement upon everybody, all experts, is that there was about $815,000 in life insurance policies. And what was available to Nancy upon Dan's death was about $809 because of that loan that they had previously taken out against one of their life insurance policies. So this is not in dispute. There's $809,000 in life insurance available to Nancy upon Dan's death. So if you look at the fidelity policy, one thing you heard from defense counsel that turned out to not be true is that this was a policy where Perla Stillwater was the beneficiary. She never was. Don't know why they said that. Don't know what that's supposed to mean. But who it really was Nathaniel, Daniel's son. Until Nancy decided that Nathaniel shouldn't get any death benefit if Dan were to die, and she changed it to her own name in 2015. So now Nathaniel gets nothing, and Nancy gets another $100,000. You go to the Forester's policy. As I mentioned earlier, real briefly, this is the policy that they claim to have cash value, forced them to save for retirement, and had that forced savings component, and this was going to be part of the big plan. First of all, it's a $40,000 policy. For it to really be of any value, even though it's not a lot, $91,000, Dan had to live to 90. That can't be part of the retirement plan. And even if he did, it's just not that much money. And they mishandled it. Nancy would draw loans against this. And what did she tell you about those loans? I just didn't pay them back. So then you look at the Americo policy. Now this is the one that was $100,000, had a $25,000 accidental death rider on it. And this is the one that seemed to be the biggest part of the retirement plan, supposedly. And the reason it was part of the big retirement plan was because if Dan were to live to 78, they would get their premium back. That's it. $63,000, they would get it back. So you have to keep this policy for 19 years to get your money back. And that's the savings plan that they chose. Not to take that money and put it into an interest-bearing account where it would actually be worth something and not be at risk for losing it. This was the plan. Now what's interesting about that is if Dan did live to 78 and they did get their premiums back, that policy goes away. Their own expert testified to that. If you want to get those premiums back, policy's gone. You don't have any more coverage. What kind of plan is that? What kind of retirement plan is that? It doesn't make any sense. And so the idea that was being asserted from defense is, well, she's not going to kill him. There's money in it for her. What, getting your money back in 20 years? Or if he's dead, you get $125,000 now. Not much of a plan at all. And Nancy apparently didn't even know that. Nancy, the insurance salesman. Nancy, the person who sold her her own policy. She didn't know that that policy went away if you were to collect the premiums. That's what she said on the stand. When I asked her, doesn't that policy go away? I don't think so. I think I can continue that for as long as I want. So either she's a horrible life insurance salesman because she can't even sell herself a policy that she understands, or she's lying to you again. So then you look at the Lincoln Financial. The only thing I want you to show here, this is the one that was provided by the school. This is one that Nancy said, this wasn't part of the plan. Because what if the school goes away? We lose this coverage. Okay. But in 2017, you might remember what she started planning in 2017, she applies for an increase in coverage on this policy. Now, applying for an increase in coverage on a policy probably isn't nearly as suspicious as pulling out new policies right before you murder someone. What's also interesting about this, she says this isn't part of the plan for retirement, but it certainly is part of the plan when Nancy decides to murder her husband. She knows she's going to get that $100,000. Now, Mutual of Omaha, I told you in opening, I stood up here and I said, after Dan's death, it appeared Nancy had attempted to claim 10 policies at $1.4 million. I believe that's exactly what I said. And we just talked about how there's $815,000 in money available to her. Now there's a difference between the two, obviously, besides the money. It was, what I said was that she appeared to attempt to collect on those 10 policies. And she did. You can see from Mutual of Omaha on their records on June 6, 2018, who reported Nancy Brophy? Who reported relationship, spouse, deceased, date of death, June 2nd, 2018. That's Nancy calling in and reporting the death in an attempt to claim the death benefit. So it appeared like everything was normal. But what did the experts find out? Both of them. What did they find out? 3 of these policies weren't in place at the time of death. So although it appeared she attempted to collect this money, it wasn't there. It wasn't available. And the experts told you, well, it could have been an auto-generated thing from the company that auto-filled in these other policies to say that this death claim was made. So the bottom line is, did Nancy know about the $815,000? Absolutely. Did Nancy try to claim $1.4 million? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe she did call and try to claim, I don't know, probably not. Probably not. But she certainly tried to claim the $815,000. Now again, this isn't all about the life insurance, as I said. You have to think in the terms of what was happening in their life at that time, and they were having serious financial problems. They were spending more than their income. Listen to both experts. Their own expert, who came in here and had some kind of crazy numbers that she ultimately fixed, she agreed that they were overspending. They were spending more money than their income than they had. They weren't making their mortgage payments. Everybody agrees about that. They were spending over $1,000 on life insurance premiums. And then when they took that 401k to fix everything, they quickly just spent that down. And using their own defense exhibit, how does that look good? They made this exhibit. Now the numbers don't lie. You look at this, the only spike up is that $35,000. And where's it going? Right back down. And all they did to get the house ready was some yard work. It's the only thing that money went to help get the house ready. Now, is it fair to say that they were awful with finances? Yeah, clearly. Spending money on guns, spending money on vacations, spending money on other things, not paying down high interest credit card debt with this loan. So where are they headed with this? Well, as you heard from the defense expert, when they did the prospectus for the rest of the year, they still were in trouble. They were just going to make it a little bit longer. So when Bob Azor took a look at those numbers and said, well, those aren't right, I'm going to do some other calculations. I'm going to see what the prospectus actually should be. Came up with 2/3 of what their defense expert told you. And Bob Azor sat up here and told you they were going to be out of money by August at the rate they were going. If significant money didn't come in or they didn't change their spending habits, they were going to be broke again by August. And Nancy knew that. They had significant financial struggles. Defense seemed to allude that, well, because they had $11,000 on June 2nd, why would she decide to kill him on that day? She didn't decide to kill him on June 2nd. The decision was not made on June 2nd. The decision was made long ago, looking at the bigger picture that they were in serious financial trouble. Nancy didn't want to live like this anymore. The worst financial struggle she's been in her life. She's 67 years old. Nothing's changing. Everything looks bleak. And now they're in more debt than ever because now they're taking out loans just to cover their mortgage. So Nancy needs solutions. What's the solution? It's quite simple. She knows she's going to get $809,000 after that loan's paid back. She knows that if Dan is killed at work, she's going to be getting workers' comp to the tune of $438,000. That's paid out over time. It's an annuity, but she's going to get that money. It comes directly to her. She knows, or she thinks, that that house is worth $700,000. So if it were to sell for $700,000, by the time you pay fees and everything, you're probably going to get about $400,000. There's still $34,000 in Dan's 401k she's going to get. Dan is worth $1.682 million approximately to Nancy if he dies. Specifically, if he dies in a shooting, because that's considered an accident and will pay out all those accidental death policies, and if he's shot at the school, because then she gets the workers' comp. $1.68 million. Now, why is that important? Because they brought an expert in here to tell you, well, if Dan had lived, Dan had a value that he would bring in his income and in the services that he provided in the home. And he was worth about $1.3 million. That's what he told you. But it would take 17 years for Nancy to realize that value. That's how long it would take, given the amount of income that he's bringing in and the value that he brought into the home. 17 years for Nancy to realize $1.3 million worth of benefit. But if she kills Dan now, he's worth $1.68 million. 1.2 of that coming to her right now and then an annuity that will pay out over time, and her Social Security payments. She's going to be fine. That lifestyle that she is dreading is going to change. Now, she's the only one that wanted that, not Dan. Dan was a simple guy. He liked his life. He loved Nancy. He didn't want to change that. He liked his chickens, as you heard many times. Loved his garden. Probably was open to getting the garden cleaned up. Probably was open to getting the yard cleaned up, so he can go back to gardening. Sarah Gitchell even sat here and told you that he wanted a few more years in that garden. He had good soil. He wanted to keep going. Even after they cleaned up that yard a little bit, right back to gardening. Dan loved those coastal trips. He loved mushroom hunting. Most of all, he loved teaching. Loved his students. Was a mentor to how many people? Loved in the community. Dan didn't want to leave that. You didn't hear from a single person who sat up here and said Dan wanted to change. Dan wanted to leave teaching. Dan couldn't do it anymore. Nobody said that. In fact, you heard the opposite. Nancy wanted all this for them. Nancy didn't want this lifestyle. She wanted to be an expat. She wanted to move to Portugal. Not Dan. In fact, Nancy wanted something so differently, something that Dan couldn't give her. She had him take on another job. Not to help out a friend. For money. Nancy knew there's financial struggles. She saw an opportunity for Dan to work more and bring in more money to maybe alleviate the finances. And so Dan goes to work at Avamere, and he's working both jobs. What did you hear? What did that do to him? It was running him into the ground. He was exhausted. Nancy even commented several times to people that Dan was changing. Yeah, he's tired. Working all the time. So yeah, does he come home and lay on the couch a little bit more? Watch a little bit more TV? Probably. Is that what Nancy wants? No. She wants Dan to do stuff for her. Maybe Dan wasn't cooking as much for her as she liked. Maybe Dan wasn't giving her enough attention. This wasn't working for Nancy. Dan was a problem. This isn't just about money, it's about the lifestyle. And Dan couldn't give it to her. I'm almost to a stopping point, I promise, Your Honor. No one said that Nancy didn't love Dan. We didn't bring any witnesses in here to say, we don't think she loved him. It must have been a problem. Nobody said that. I'm not asserting that. She probably did love him. But she wasn't getting the lifestyle that she needed. She had to make a change. Defense made a big deal about compromises. Well, if Nancy wants to move to Portugal, Dan doesn't, maybe they'll just take some trips, more trips. That was the compromise. I think once we finally got to an understanding of what compromise meant, if you remember, we think that that's probably the final compromise. And that's what was going to save this whole situation. So we got this money now, we got this plan, and we're going to compromise. But those trips aren't Portugal. Those aren't lavish trips out of the country. The farthest they went out of the country was to Vancouver. Then they went to Malibu or Monterey Bay, went to an aquarium, took a cooking class. And then their next big trip was to Mount Rushmore. That's not good enough for Nancy. Nancy needs Portugal. Nancy wants more. These little trips aren't going to do it. As I said, this murder is not entirely motivated by money. It's that lifestyle change that she needed to, that Nancy needed to have, And as you heard from Dr. Warford, as I've mentioned several times, Nancy is a problem solver, and Dan has become a problem in her life. She needs to change it, and there's no other way. And divorce is not an option. Nancy even said that on the stand when we talked about divorce. Divorce is expensive. What is Nancy going to get after a divorce? They split half their earnings, or I'm sorry, half their stuff. The house sold for $565,000. It ultimately sold for that. After you pay realtor fees and after you pay off the mortgage, there's maybe a couple $100,000 left. They're going to split that. So she gets $100,000. That's her plan. She's not going to get the lifestyle she wants. That's all she gets is $100,000 out of this. Divorce was not an option for Nancy. The only way that she could live the lifestyle that she wanted was to murder Dan and be entitled to upwards of $1.6 million. I will save my next section for after lunch if you'd like to break, Your Honor. Unless you'd like me to continue.
How much further do you think it'll take? Rough estimate.
30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes.
All right, we'll take our lunch break then. Let's plan to be back at 1:40.
Okay, we'll go off record.